On September 9, 2025, the calm of Doha was shattered in an instant by an unexpected Israeli airstrike. The city, known for its gleaming towers and sense of security, was suddenly thrust into chaos as explosions echoed across the skyline. The intended target was clear: senior Hamas leaders believed to be hiding in the heart of the Qatari capital, far from the front lines of conflict. But the operation did not go as planned. The Hamas leaders managed to escape, slipping away in the confusion. Tragically, 6 people lost their lives in the attack, among them a Qatari security officer who was responding to the emergency. This was no ordinary military strike. It was a direct assault on the sovereignty of an Arab nation, and it ignited a firestorm of outrage across the Middle East. Protests erupted in capitals from Cairo to Amman as people demanded justice and accountability. Doha, long seen as a symbol of Gulf stability and home to the largest U.S. military base in the region, was now transformed into a war zone overnight. The sense of invulnerability that once defined the city was gone. The attack exposed the vulnerability of even the most fortified capitals, sending shockwaves through regional alliances and forcing leaders to confront the reality that nowhere was truly safe. Israel's government, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, quickly found itself under intense scrutiny. Not only had the mission failed to achieve its objective, but it had also triggered a diplomatic crisis at home and abroad, with citizens and allies alike questioning the wisdom of the operation. Instead of projecting strength, Israel now faced growing isolation. Its actions were condemned by the United Nations and world leaders, leaving its diplomats scrambling to contain the fallout. The world watched in disbelief as the conflict, once confined to Gaza, spilled into the very heart of the Gulf. The attack upended decades-old assumptions about security and stability in the region, leaving millions anxious about what might come next. Qatar's prime minister did not mince words, calling the strike state terrorism in a televised address. The region braced for the fallout, uncertain how far the repercussions would reach or how quickly events might spiral. The strike didn't just claim 6 lives, it shattered the illusion of safety that residents had long taken for granted. The city mourned its dead, and its people were left to grapple with a new, unsettling reality. Across the Middle East, every nation now questioned its alliances, its security, and its future in a region that suddenly felt more unstable than ever before. Urgent meetings and emergency summits became the new normal. The world waited anxiously for a response from the one power expected to prevent such chaos: the United States. All eyes turned to Washington, hoping for leadership in a moment of crisis. The stage was set for a crisis that would not only test old alliances but also redefine the future of the region for years to come. Qatar is a linchpin for U.S. interests, a tiny state with massive influence. Despite its small size, Qatar's strategic location and diplomatic reach have made it a key player in the Gulf, often punching far above its weight on the world stage. Al-Udeid Air Base anchors American military power in the region, coordinating operations from Iraq to Afghanistan. This sprawling base is the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East, serving as a nerve center for air operations, intelligence gathering, and rapid deployment. An attack on Doha threatened not just Qatar, but the stability of this vital U.S. asset. The ripple effects could destabilize the entire region, undermining years of careful military planning and cooperation. Qatar is also an energy giant, supplying liquefied natural gas to Europe and Asia, making its stability crucial for global markets. Any disruption here could send shockwaves through energy prices, affecting millions worldwide. The Israeli strike risked both military and economic chaos, challenging the very foundation of U.S. strategy in the Middle East. The delicate balance between allies and interests was suddenly in jeopardy. Doha's unique role, hosting both American troops and adversaries like Hamas, has long frustrated Washington, but made Qatar indispensable. Its ability to mediate between rivals has often been a double-edged sword, complicating U.S. diplomacy, but also opening doors no one else can. Now the U.S. faced a dilemma: defend its military partner, or stand by its closest regional ally, Israel. The decision would test not only alliances, but the very principles guiding American foreign policy. The attack put thousands of American personnel at risk, raising fears for their safety and the security of critical infrastructure. It also threatened global energy supplies with potential consequences for economies far beyond the Middle East. The world watched to see if Washington could balance these competing interests, as leaders and citizens alike braced for the fallout. The stakes had never been higher for America's credibility. Every move was scrutinized, every word weighed for its global impact. The next move would define the future of US influence in the region, shaping alliances and rivalries for years to come. In the aftermath of the strike, the world turned to Washington for leadership, expecting clarity, direction, and a steady hand. Instead, what they received was silence, a void where decisive words should have been. Hours slipped by with no statement from President Trump. There was no condemnation of the attack, no reassurance for anxious allies, and no guidance for a world on edge. The silence grew heavier with each passing minute. When the White House finally broke its silence, the response was tepid and vague. The strike was called unfortunate, and officials claimed the US had only learned of it after the fact, offering little comfort or clarity. This admission sent shockwaves through the region, leaving leaders and citizens alike stunned and uncertain about what would come next. America, long seen as the guarantor of regional security, had been left out of the loop by its closest ally, Israel. The trust that once defined this partnership now seemed deeply shaken. President Trump distanced himself from the decision, publicly blaming Netanyahu and making it clear that the choice was not his own. In Arab capitals, this looked less like a calculated strategy and more like a display of weakness. Leaders questioned whether the US was still willing or able to lead. The US appeared unable to restrain Israel or protect its own interests, leaving embassies shuttered and allies exposed. The American security guarantee, once considered ironclad, now seemed hollow and uncertain, its credibility eroding in real time. This hesitation became a turning point, shaking the very foundations of trust in US commitments and alliances across the region. For decades, Gulf states had relied on Washington's protection, believing that American power would always be there in times of crisis. The silence from Washington shattered that confidence, signaling a dangerous new era of uncertainty and vulnerability for America's partners. Allies began to openly question whether America would stand by them in a crisis, or if they would be left to face threats alone. The world saw a superpower seemingly paralyzed by its own alliances, unable to act decisively or provide the leadership it once promised. The old order was crumbling, and the region was left to fend for itself, forced to reconsider its own security and alliances. The consequences of this silence would be felt far beyond the Gulf, rippling across the globe and reshaping the balance of power for years to come. While America hesitated, the Arab world erupted in outrage. Qatar's neighbors, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, set aside old rivalries to condemn the strike and stand with Doha. The attack forced a rare unity, as Arab states rallied against what they saw as a threat to all. Egypt and the Arab League joined the chorus, calling for emergency meetings and coordinated action. Qatar seized the moment, hosting a summit to lead the diplomatic response and isolate Israel. Internationally, countries like Turkey and Canada condemned the attack, while the EU and UN scrambled to respond. The global outcry left Israel more isolated than ever, and highlighted America's conspicuous silence. The world saw a new reality. The US was no longer leading but lagging behind. The crisis had become a test of America's place in the world order. As the US faltered, Russia and China moved swiftly. Moscow condemned the Israeli strike and offered Qatar support, positioning itself as a reliable partner. China called for respect of sovereignty and led efforts at the UN to censure Israel. Both powers saw opportunity in America's hesitation, offering to mediate and proposing new security arrangements for the Gulf. Gulf leaders, alarmed by US inaction, began courting Moscow and Beijing, not just for trade, but for security guarantees. The region's alliances started to shift, with Russia and China gaining influence at America's expense. The perception of US unreliability became a powerful tool for America's rivals. Washington's absence opened the door for a new balance of power in the Middle East. The great recalibration of alliances had begun. Russia and China were no longer just economic partners, they were now potential protectors. The US was no longer the only game in town. The crisis sent shockwaves through global markets. Oil prices soared as traders feared wider conflict and disruption of energy supplies. Qatar's stability was now in question, raising the specter of a 1970s-style energy crisis. The US dollar's dominance was quietly challenged, as Gulf states explored trading oil in other currencies. The move to diversify away from the dollar signaled a loss of faith in American leadership. Investors fled to safe havens and global markets trembled. The economic fallout was a direct verdict on US hesitation. Rising energy prices and financial uncertainty were the price of a broken security order. The world's confidence in America's ability to manage crises was shaken. The era of unquestioned U.S. economic dominance was ending. The Israeli strike fractured the Abraham Accords, the Trump administration's signature achievement. Arab signatories like the UAE and Bahrain faced a dilemma: support Israel or stand with Qatar. Public solidarity with Qatar revealed deep strains in these new alliances. The attack shattered the trust that underpinned normalization, raising fears that no Gulf capital was safe. Iran and Turkey seized the moment, championing the Palestinian cause and condemning Israel. The dream of a new integrated Middle East was suddenly in jeopardy. Old fault lines resurfaced and the region began to fracture along new dangerous lines. The Abraham Accords survived, but their foundation was badly shaken. The promise of lasting peace was replaced by renewed uncertainty. The U.S. hesitation in the Qatar crisis marked the end of an era. American primacy in the Middle East was no longer assured. The strike and Washington's weak response exposed a leadership vacuum at the heart of the global order. Gulf states began hedging, building new ties with Russia and China. The Abraham Accords faltered, and the region shifted from U.S. dominance to multipolar competition. Rivals were emboldened, allies were shaken, and economic ripples spread worldwide. The world became more fragmented and contested. The Israeli strike and America's fumbled response will be remembered as a turning point. The post-Cold War order cracked, and the limits of U.S. influence were laid bare. The alliances and assumptions of the past are gone. The future of the Middle East and the world is now uncertain.